and scholars in general, an impulse which resulted in our jointly edited book, Salem Village Witchcraft, a documentary record of local conflict in colonial New England, published in 1972 by Wadsworth Publishing Company of Belmont, California. But our pleasure at the richness of all this local and personal documentation was exceeded by our surprise at how casually and rarely any of these materials had been tapped by historians. Only one writer, we found, had made any direct use of them, and that more than a century ago. In 1867, Charles W. Upham, a Salem minister, mayor, and U.S. congressman who had steeped himself in the inner history of Salem Village, published Salem Witchcraft, a 2-volume study which, by dealing with many of the sources we had found, began the difficult job of deciphering that inner history. Even Upham's analysis, however, impressive as it is, remains incomplete and ultimately unsatisfactory. Like most 19th-century local historians, Upham idealized the sturdy colonial yeomen who figure in his narrative, dwelling almost affectionately on their petty disputes, but often drawing back from confronting the larger patterns implicit in these disputes, or from analyzing them in serious political terms. Ever sensitive to the colorful vignette or the quaint detail, he often left out or obscured more significant matters. For example, while lavishing careful attention upon a protracted but ultimately peripheral land dispute between the Nurse family and the eccentric son of a former colonial governor, he barely hinted at the far more crucial rivalry between the two principal families of Salem Village, the Putnams and the Porters. Similarly, he relegated to a small type supplement his account of the efforts of Samuel Parris's opponents to force the minister from his pulpit, and he neglected, perhaps deliberately, to include the 2 key petitions which reveal the names of the antagonists and the full scope of the factional battle they were waging. Of the modern historians of Salem witchcraft, the few who have discussed the pre- or post-1692 situations at all have continued to rely uncritically on Upham's imperfect narrative and analysis. They have ignored not only the manuscript records, but also those sources which, over the years, did find their way into print, including the Salem Village Parish records and the Essex County probate and court records for most of the 17th century. So far as we can tell, Charles Upham has been the only historian of Salem witchcraft to have read through any of these sources, published or unpublished. Even Marion L. Starkey's engaging 1949 narrative of the witchcraft trials, The Devil in Massachusetts, which, despite its occasional imaginative embellishments, remains the best researched and certainly the most dramatic account of the events of 1692, draws exclusively, and superficially at that, upon Upham for its background sections. Why is it that 20th century historians of Salem witchcraft have not bothered to explore the history of Salem Village, or the lives of the men, women, and children who peopled it, apart from that fleeting moment when the community achieved lasting notoriety? In the first place, there have always been other contexts, seemingly more significant, into which the witchcraft outbreak could easily be placed without going beyond the events and documents of 1692. The history of the occult, the psychopathology of adolescence, the excesses of repressive Puritanism, the periodic recrudescence of mass hysteria and collective persecution in Western society. The Devil in Massachusetts.